Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, August 20th, 2020, 8/20/2020. My name is Bill Woodcock, and you're listening or watching to another edition of Forward Maryland. With me, as always, is my indefatigable, I can't remember the word. Anyway, my indomitable co-host, Jason Booms. Jason, how's your week going?
It is going fantastic. Thanks for the intro. I feel undeserving of it, but I am making a lot of progress in my time working at the home. I think I'm this close to solving the D.B. Cooper mystery, inspired in part by just going down the well of YouTube videos on crime stories. So I'm spending my time very productively. How are you, Bill?
Well, I have to say I haven't had any major breakthroughs like that, but I am interested. Where the hell is DB? Can you give us a preview when you release your findings?
I'll give you my best estimate prior to whatever research I might uncover for money. Yeah, I'll drop some hints here.
Oh, okay. Or would these be interspersed throughout the podcast? Or are you just going to blurt out in a motherless scenario or wait to the end? Or you're just going to hold us suspense?
I would say stay tuned if you want to hear more, but you may not hear more until another several podcasts from now. So
stay tuned as more will follow.
Here's a tagline.
Oh, I hope I didn't just insult you. So, with us this evening, yeah, I know, we just got in trouble, right? I just got us in trouble. I don't understand why I did that. People don't like being referenced. What can I say? Anyway, we have a terrific show this evening, or morning or afternoon, whenever you are listening or watching this. I'm very pleased to bring a veteran investigative reporter to our show tonight to talk about issues of environmental health and safety. It's been a very common theme on our podcast to write about and talk about things that are getting obscured from view during the current state of the news cycle and the current state of how things move in the news and information cycle of the world today. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce Pat Elder. He is an investigative reporter with Civilian Exposure. For your web pleasure, it is www.civilianexposure, all one word, .org. It's an organization based in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, that tracks the contamination of chemicals from military bases into water supplies that affect civilians in the U.S. and throughout the world. Pat's chemical of interest are polyfluoroalkyl substances. I said that much better than I did indefatigable earlier, a couple minutes ago. These are some very dangerous chemicals. These are chemicals that have been well known to, they accumulate in the environment for decades. They have been linked and are well known to be causes of kidney and prostate cancer, amongst others. And they're better known, so you don't have to pronounce that word, as PFAS. So Pat's work on PFAS appears on a website called www.militarypoisons.org. Pat, welcome to the show this evening.
Oh, thanks, Bill, and thank you too, Jason.
All right. So to start, tell me about the history of polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, how you got involved in it, and how were these things developed and how are they used?
Well, it goes all the way back to 1938 in the labs of DuPont Chemicals back in New Jersey. And chemists were always experimenting. And actually, it was an accident. And they merged fluoride substances on the one hand with carbon. And they realized that the fluorine and the carbon tends to come together to create a bond that is the strongest bond ever developed by people. And so when they created an 8 carbon chain molecule with each carbon atom being fluoridated by 2 or more fluorine atoms, if any of that makes any sense, they created a chemical that is the strongest chemical ever produced. It repels fire better than anything ever produced ever since. This goes back to 1938. And it repels grease and dirt better than anything else as well. And so immediately it was noticed that it had all kinds of applications. You could spray it on boots and they didn't get wet. You could put it on a fire and it would go out immediately, especially your type B fires, which are fires that are, petroleum based, like super hot fires. And the substance was immediately used during the Manhattan Project, and was indispensable in helping to develop the Trinity bomb, during World War II in 1945. And then shortly thereafter, several patents and the stuff began to be used for commercial purposes, coating carpets, coating rain gear, firefighting suits. But most importantly, and the number one way this stuff makes it into the environment and into our bodies, is through firefighting exercises on military bases. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what they did in literally thousands and thousands of cases is they would, and this is the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marines, dig a 200-foot diameter crater, usually 2 to 3 feet deep, and they would fill it with, jet fuel and various types of waste oil, and they'd ignite it, and then they'd put it out with this stuff, this PFAS-laced aqueous film-forming foam, AFFF. And, they did so for, 1969 was the beginning. And they're still using the stuff today. The military just last year has promised they won't use it in practice anymore, but they still use it in cases of emergency, and they still have plenty of stocks on hand. The problem with the stuff is that it doesn't break down. That bond, that I mentioned initially between the carbon and the fluoride, it just doesn't go away. And Bill, you mentioned in the beginning that the stuff doesn't break down for decades. They're called forever chemicals, and its breakdown time can be compared more to the half-life of nuclear waste. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of years. And it's bioaccumulative, which means when it gets into biota, when it gets into plant life, when it gets into fish, when it gets into humans, it just accumulates. So you might have, a river with 3,000 parts per trillion of this PFAS stuff in it from military base, usage of the stuff, but fish with 2 and 3 million parts per trillion, which then, of course, is consumed by us. So, and then last is that it's been linked to a half a dozen types of cancer, kidney, testicular, thyroid problems, immunity problems, pancreatic, liver, kidney, I mentioned that. Also developmental problems with the fetus. The stuff carries through a mother's milk, and it also carries through the umbilical cord. Virtually all American babies are born with the stuff in their bodies, and most Americans, 99% of us, we believe, have PFAS in their bodies. It causes a host of problems. So it's something that, you know, the EPA is not acting on. If in a nutshell, the EPA begins to regulate the stuff under the Superfund Act, then there'd be tremendous liability for the military. And many of us believe that's the reason why the EPA has left it up to the individual states. And Maryland has been asleep at the switch. And, you know, you can go to several websites by simply Googling, I don't know, PFAS, states, legislatures, regulations, and you'll see that, you know, states like Minnesota and Massachusetts and Michigan have 10, 15 regulations each. And Maryland lazily got around to its first regulation last year, which really doesn't accomplish much.
Yeah, and as I was doing my background research on this topic, I came across this website, Green Building Law Update, and there was an article that was headlined, "Maryland is the first state to legislate the permitted use of PFAS." Plus, as I'm looking through the state government's website, I saw the name of the Maryland Department of the Environment Secretary, a gentleman by the name of Ben Grumbles. And this person has been in office ever since Governor Hogan took over as governor in January 2015. And I'm sorry to get a little bit political for a second, but as much as Governor Hogan says he has serious concerns about President Trump, he certainly took something out of the Trump playbook before Trump even had a playbook, and he seems to have appointed a person to manage a cabinet department who really has very little interest in the portfolio in which they manage, as it seems that Grumbles was a pro-industry, a pro-chemical industry, executive. What is, and I also, getting back to your point about the DOD installations, Maryland has so many DOD installations, Fort Detrick, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Fort Meade, dozens. I can't imagine that this is not a big issue, and that, there's lots of PFAS in Maryland's runoff. And in fact, I came across data that state as such. So, why, as much as Maryland is a environmentally conscious state, loves the bay, loves our rivers and our tributaries and such, why is Maryland, what's going on here in this state?
Well, I worked with Delegate Sarah Love last year, and I went to her with about 12 or 15 points that I had gleaned from other states, and spoke with members of the Sierra Club's toxic team, and others across the country, especially scientists with Northeastern University and the Environmental Working Group. We know what we have to do. And so I presented Delegate Love, who's a progressive Democrat, with this litany of a legislative wish list. And probably the lowest lying fruit out there, is that it's what Maryland chose to do, and it's a step in the right direction. I don't mean to badmouth it so much, but the state of Maryland outlawed, they prohibit the use of PFAS in firefighting foams at municipal firehouses for practice, which is good, because it's going to take one separate stream of PFAS out of the environment. So, I applaud that. The problem is, of course, that most European nations have switched years ago, and almost all major European airport hubs use fluorine-free foams. And many European militaries, it will soon be all militaries in Europe, because the European Union is now switching to entirely, they're going to ban all PFAS, including, of course, in firefighting foam. So perfectly capable, non-fluoride firefighting foam, 3F we call it, fluorine-free foams, exist. And so Maryland, in the meantime, actually has a line in the legislation that says nothing herein will, make it illegal to use the stuff. It's perfectly valid to use PFAS in the state of Maryland. No, that's not the way you want to go. You need to get rid of this stuff. It doesn't break down. If it's in wires that are discarded, wires that are coating, and that's discarded in the landfill, it seeps into the water. It doesn't break down. It gets into the creeks. It gets into the bay. If it winds up in the sewer stream, which it often does through military bases, then that sludge is slathered on farm fields, and we're consuming that. And the PFA doesn't break down. It goes into the ground still. We can't get rid of the stuff. When they try to incinerate it, for goodness sakes, you got to get those incinerator stacks up past 2,000 Fahrenheit. And most incinerators don't go that high. So we had a case in New York in Cohoes earlier this year. No, actually, at the end of 2019, they stopped it, where the military was actually incinerating this stuff. And they did tests on people's lawns and found that it wasn't burnt. It was still there. It's firefighting foam, for goodness sakes.
Right.
Of course it's tough to burn.
Yeah, one more question, and then I'll pass it over to Jason. But PFAS, or I keep wanting to say PFAS. It's the science dork in me wanting to say that.
Yeah.
I remember about 10, 15 years ago that polyfluorocarbons in, say, plastic tubes that were going into people's stents and were being used for medical reasons, people were having big time allergic and like toxic shock syndrome sorts of reactions.
Yeah.
And I remember I could have sworn that those things were banned out of plastic tubing on a federal level. Why aren't these chemicals banned?
Well, because there's no political will to ban them. The military uses them, and they use them for wide applications, for chrome plating, for degreasing, for firefighting, especially on ships. And they've not given up on using them on ships. They never will, because it'll snuff out a fire. They claim better than anything else, although the Europeans beg to differ. So you just don't have the political will to put it out. And but your earlier point about Ben Grumbles, the head of Maryland's Department of the Environment, I had my water tested here on St. Inigo's Creek. I live in St. Mary's City, where all the fourth graders go once a year. I mean, once in their lifetime. And I'm actually on a really historic spot. It's where St. Inigo's Creek, or Ignatius Loyola Creek, empties into the St. Mary's River. And, we daily get the foam. There's a Webster Field annex of the Patuxent River Naval Air Test Center, 2,400 feet across the creek, and there's a hangar there. And they use the stuff there, I believe, for about 30 years. And so daily the foam builds up on my beach. So I tested the water in, February, and the results came back showing 1,894 parts per trillion of PFAS, which is astronomical levels. And so when the results were published and picked up by the local press and other press, the head of a spokesman for the Maryland Department of the Environment said that if the chemicals exist in Elders Creek, because we don't know the efficacy of Elders' testing regime, well, the lab I use is the University of Michigan's biological laboratory using the gold standard EPA 538 version 1 for testing PFAS. Anyway, the guy says, well, this stuff could come from many different sources. Elder can't just point to the military. It could come from landfills, or it could come from fire stations. This individual is the state of Maryland's in charge of monitoring federal Superfund cleanups. And, we have a landfill at the St. Andrews landfill here in St. Mary's. It's 11 miles away. We have a firehouse at Valley Lee. It's 6 miles away. I've got an airport hangar that's 2,400 feet across the creek where they used this stuff for 30 years. And I think that's where it came from. And so you have Maryland's top officials saying it probably came from anywhere else, just kind of casting this doubt on the whole program. What's up with that? What could possibly explain it? In Connecticut and in Minnesota and in Michigan, these state officials, they're alarmed. They see tests like this and they say, oh my God, are people eating the fish? They're testing fish. Just to give you a sense, in Wisconsin, Lake Monoma, right outside of Truax Air Force Base, they've got a regulation now that says you can't eat fish out of waters higher than 12 parts per trillion for PFAS. I've got 1,800 parts per trillion PFAS here. And we can eat all the crabs and oysters and fish. Imagine what would happen in Maryland if all of a sudden, and they said, oh, you can't eat crabs in Maryland anymore. Or you can't eat the oysters. We found oysters with 1.1 million parts per trillion right outside of the Pax River Naval Air Station near Solomons. That was back in 2002. But I mean, you see the point here. Other states are way ahead of us. It's like Maryland is only now beginning to wake up. However, Grumbles does say this is of utmost importance because he knows that that the state has been asleep, and so has the Baltimore Sun. And the Baltimore Sun has not reported on this stuff, and I have hounded them. And they finally ran a front page story. They put me on the cover of the Baltimore Sun on Sunday's edition about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And it was above and below the fold. And then a massive coverage, like how they do on, like A8 and A9. I mean, they really gave it a spin, basically saying, hey, Maryland, where you been? But hey, Baltimore Sun, where you been too?
Right.
Don't mean to go on too
No,
long, but Jason ran this.
Yeah.
Sorry, buddy.
No problem at all.
Yeah, man.
Now, well, actually, I've got a couple of questions. One is a follow-up. You talked about the movement of the Europeans towards using a foam that is fluorine-free, doesn't have that strong chemical bond that PFAS does. Are there any militaries in the world besides the Americans that are still using this particular product?
Well, because of NATO in Europe, they all do. Mm-hmm. And so, like in Germany, they're in the process of banning it, and their municipal airports don't use it anymore, and their municipal firehouses don't use it anymore. But it is used, let's say, at Ramstein Air Base or Spangdahlem Air Base. Mm-hmm. Now, outside of Spangdahlem Air Base is a good example. There's a little town called Wittlichland, and I spoke there 2 years ago. Had a church of 900 people in a church listen to me speak on PFAS. They're alarmed. I mean, they've taken asparagus and strawberry off the market because it's contaminated from the rivers coming from Spangdahlem, coming from Buchel, coming from Ramstein. And, this little town of Wittlichland actually went to court to sue the United States Air Force for the contamination. They sued them for the contamination because it was going into the municipal water system. I mean, into the municipal wastewater system. And so they would have the sludge, and the sludge was tested, and it was, of course, you just spread it on farm fields. And the German Federal Republic, the feds in Germany said, you can't put that stuff on your farm fields anymore because it's going to poison German people. And so they said, well, we're not allowed to sue the Americans. We tried to sue the Americans. They say, because of the SOFA agreement, which is Status of Forces Agreement, we're not allowed to sue them. So they're suing the federal government of Germany, and that is pending in court. That'll be interesting because throughout Germany, you have contaminated lakes and streams and poisonous fish. People aren't allowed to eat. You can eat it here.
Mhm. And actually, I was going to ask you about that. Just given the fact that the United States is exerts its military power, projects a power worldwide. And actually, I'm looking at the Military Poisons website. I'm seeing a picture from an Okinawa taken in 2013. It looks like a field covered with snow, but it's actually PFAS laced foam. And I was wondering, to what extent, I mean, you mentioned the German example. Are there other places around the world where local interests and other state actors or others are saying, hey, you're wrecking the environment, or the food system in our country. Can you please stop? Anyone else doing that?
Well, I mean, you brought up the Okinawa case. Absolutely, in Okinawa. I mean, there's always been a very strong environmental presence and an anti-military presence in Okinawa. And I actually worked with several, representatives from Okinawa and in Japan who are representatives of the Japanese Diet, and 69 members of the parliament in Japan wrote a letter back in March to the United States, military, demanding that the military open up their bases to Japanese inspection. Of course, the Japanese and the Americans have a SOFA agreement as well, and the request was denied. But I mean, it's kind of a moot point as far as I'm concerned. We know where the contamination's coming from. You could see the stuff coming out of the wells. But the United States in overseas areas claims that because of national security and their security and these agreements, there's nothing that people in these countries can do regarding the contamination of PFAS. I mean, it's the same thing in America. I mean, we've had cases in New Mexico and Michigan where people have sued, states have sued, the federal government, and the Trump administration has responded in U.S. District Court in both cases, claiming sovereign immunity. And if you really read the briefs, basically they're saying, hey, okay, we're poisoning you. We get it. But we have the right to do that. And there's nothing you can do about it.
That is horrifying. I laugh, but I'm not surprised. But nonetheless, it's from a legal perspective or a strategy, it's very disconcerting. I do have one more question for you in terms of whether it's a data point or was it a personal story that you had heard that really drove home the importance of this issue for you?
Well, there were two things that moved me. I spent 20 years cobbling a life together through various grants in a countering recruitment campaign. I wrote a book that did actually pretty well, military recruiting in the United States. And so I've been involved in that kind of anti-militarism in the schools, where they'd say, okay, all you black kids in Alabama have to sit down and take a military test. And everybody seems to be okay with that. And they don't even go to the wealthy white schools. So that was a fight, but we didn't get too far with that. And I was at a conference in Minnesota 3 years ago, and I heard Pat Hines, who was EPA's Woman of the Year of 2009. We were on a panel together on military contamination. I was speaking briefly on, the J. ROTC firing ranges in 2,200 high school cafeterias and, the airborne lead, and maybe it's not a very good idea to have lead settling on cafeteria tables. I mean, we actually had legislation introduced in Maryland that didn't go anywhere because we couldn't get Maryland's Democratic, bosses to get behind it because they were afraid it was anti-military. All we were calling for is just a cessation of the use of lead. I got a little off track. But Pat Hines spoke about burn pits, and she said that there's this new developing chemical that, it's actually been around for 60 years, but it is killing people. It is genetically changing people, and we can't get around it. And that was when I first found out about it. Pat Hines and I are working still together today. And then there was a story in the in Military Times. Military Times is actually a very good journalistic newspaper. It's a Gannett publication. It's not affiliated with the military. Man, Tara Kopp, Taracopp, why women were told don't get pregnant at George Air Force Base. Blew me away. And she interviewed 3 women whom I am very close friends with today. Kate Kelly and Lisa McRae and gosh, who else? Yeah, 3 women. And, you know, I just, Denise Torrey, 3 of them. And, you know, somebody posted something, one of the women who served George Air Force Base in the early 90s posted something on Facebook, says, I'm being nostalgic, and does anybody have any pictures of George Air Force Base, you know, from the early 90s? And then somebody posted, said, I was there, but I think I got sick from there. And then somebody posted, I had a miscarriage. And somebody else, I had a miscarriage. I had a stillborn. I had a stillborn. I had a hysterectomy. 300 women with stories of hysterectomies and stillborns, you know, horrible stuff. And all of them with redacted records from the Air Force. Check it out. It's an amazing story. That got me on it. And so since then, you know, I organized a conference in California last year, which never happened because of COVID. You know, it was a 20-city tour, but we were just have these 3 women speak in Berkeley and in San Francisco. Figure if anybody's going to listen to the story, it's going to be people in Berkeley and San Francisco. You know, an outside chance here in Maryland, I don't know, but
that's eye-opening stuff, though. It definitely is.
So, yeah, I mean, it's sad stuff. Like Lisa, Denise. Oh my God, Denise had 1 child. She had several miscarriages and a hysterectomy after that. Her 1 child, Lauren, is 34. She has had a hysterectomy. She had 1 child, and her daughter had her period at 12 years old last year, and never stopped bleeding and had a hysterectomy. And they all point to PFAS. This is bad stuff.
So Pat, I do want to, you know, I want to warn you, and here comes a little bit more of a political statement, but you may be appearing on a podcast with 2 bleeding heart liberals. And or at least I'm very liberal when it comes to issues of the environment. And you know, one of the things, you know, I'm sure there are people out there who are watching or listening to this who, if they're still watching or listening, are going, there go these two pinkos again. But I do want to demonstrate, I mean, there's a website that you sent me called saferstates.com that lists the states that have enacted legislation with respect to these sorts of toxins. And Maryland is amongst them. And of course, Maryland's at least a presidentially blue state. My contention is that it's very purple in terms when it comes to state and local races.
Me too.
But then other very reliable liberal states like New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts are listed. Also your purple states, your Pennsylvania, your Ohio, your Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, and your western states who kind of do their own thing, your California, Oregon, Washington. But then there's also Utah and Nevada and Nebraska and Iowa and Arkansas and Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina and West Virginia. So, you know, I would caution anybody there, anybody out there in listener or viewer land, to think that this is a wild-eyed liberal cause. I would caution them to think again. And Pat, I also know, I mean, we've had several state legislators who listen to this podcast. We've had several of them on the podcast. I know a number of them pay attention. And I know on the Military Poisons website, you have a petition for people in Maryland to sign. Tell us more about that and what you're looking for people to do.
The petition is basically a legislative wish list, but it's one thing to sound the alarm. It's another thing to give people a kind of roadmap, So let me just go through this. I mean, we need first of all to establish maximum contaminant levels in Maryland's drinking water. We haven't done that, and actually, the EPA has not established maximum contaminant levels. The EPA instead has an advisory of 70 parts per trillion, where Harvard professors and Harvard Public Health and Northeastern University and the Environmental Working Group and a whole litany of respected scientists say we shouldn't be drinking more than 1 part per trillion of this stuff daily. And so Maryland has done nothing but just allow people to continue to drink the PFAS. And so we have like 3,600 public water systems in the state. Let's follow the lead of New England states. Let's follow the lead of Massachusetts and Vermont, and let's test them. It's like COVID, okay? That's first, and then we need to set PFAS, contaminant levels, and we need to set contaminant levels for surface water, and gosh, we need to test around industrial sites. All you have to do is Google Teflon products, Google manufacturing PFT, Google manufacturing processes PFAS, Google those types of things in Maryland, and you'll find a list of industries that either put together products containing PFAS or manufacture products containing PFAS, and then examine the water near them. Of course, examine the water near military installations throughout the state. And heck, I think there are about, we know that the military has admitted 16 have used PFAS, but I believe that there are about 80 that probably have. So we need to do that. We need to test our crabs, and we need to test our fish. Here's a point that I didn't make earlier, but about 2/3 of all the PFAS in our bodies is from food, and most of it comes from seafood because it's bioaccumulative. It's not the drinking water. The drinking water, we're throughout the country, we're slowly getting it together because all you have to do really is filter the stuff through this granular activated carbon. So try to imagine like something half the size of your living room filled up with little carbon bits, and you put water through that and it comes out the other end pretty cleaned of PFAS. So we can treat this stuff. It costs a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it's the seafood. And I mean, just imagine, the state of Maryland banning crabs. The stuff gathers in the mustard and of the crab. Don't eat the mustard in the crab. So do the PCBs that you were talking about earlier. So does the mercury. So you got to be careful there. What else? We got to test private wells near industrial and military facilities. People that live close to military bases are really threatened. I mean, we've got, Chesapeake Beach, for instance, has 240,000 parts per trillion in the ground. You're only supposed to drink 1, per day. And we have people that live 1,000 feet. Karen Drive, Dalrymple Drive, from the burn pit that's been used since 1969. Come on, we've got to get with the program and take care of people. We need to test sewer sludge. before it's slathered on fields. And we need to set maximum contaminant levels for sewer sludge. And I'm almost done, guys. We need to create a fund in the state of Maryland to allow people to have their private wells tested. We need to ban all PFAS in Maryland. It needs to be banned, not the lazy. You mentioned it earlier, Bill. You mentioned a story earlier about the kind of laughing at the state of Maryland, right?
Right.
Right. It's like, we went in the wrong direction. We need to ban it in firefighting foams. We need to ban incineration. And we need a law that says we ban exporting the stuff to be incinerated other places, because really Maryland lives matter, but lives everywhere matter. You can't incinerate the stuff. So we can't create it here, put it through sludge, and then send it off for incineration. And then we need to ban it in food packaging, because that's another, pathway to human ingestion. But you asked, there's the answer.
Yeah, and it's a great answer. And Pat, I mean, as environmentally conscious as this state is, I mean, I can't imagine that there couldn't be a groundswell up on these issues. But as you stated earlier, I mean, fear or for some reason, concern of being perceived as anti-military or anti-first responder in the case of the firefighting foam. I mean, it's a little bit wrong. It's more than a little bit wrong-headed.
Well, when I got into this, Bill, I'm a pacifist. Like I'm a type, like a Catholic pacifist. Go figure, and an anti-militarist. I mean, there are people like me, like Quakers, Mennonites, peaceniks. I'm one of those guys. But with this program, the heck with the military stuff. That's coincidental. Now it's not the military thing. It's that, Denise's granddaughter, had her first period and never stopped bleeding. It's Tara Kopp documenting 300 women who had their military records redacted. This is just shrapnel here. The military is a secondary thing of it. Regardless of where the PFAS may come from, it could come from industry. The state of Maryland needs to get on the ball.
Jason has been jumping at me wildly to ask one last question, and I unfortunately cannot respond to him because the Zoom is telling me that Jason Boones is not part of this meeting, which indeed he is.
Oh, wow.
So, Jason, I am lobbing the birdie your way, sir.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you've obviously, Pat, gone over several policy areas where there could be reform in the state of Maryland. Just if you had to point out one call to action for someone who's interested in environmental issues, are there organizations they should turn to? Are there websites they should go to read more on these issues? What would you tell such a person to do?
Well, I would go first to the Environmental Working Group. This is just a first-rate organization that pulls from scientists, New York, Michigan, Northeastern University, Boston, and really they are the go-to for cataloging the science and pushing for legislative reforms. Not so much in the states. They could do a better job as far as documenting where we are with states. JD Supra is a law tracking organization. They I think Bill mentioned earlier Safer States. They do an even better job than Safer States documenting where individual states are. In Maryland, we really don't have anybody that I've been able to find that is working on PFAS exposure. It's COVID time, and we're all busy. And you can imagine what it's like, for me. I mean, I'll send out these things on PFAS, and people are working on the death penalty. you know, you know what I mean. And it just hasn't really gotten a great deal of traction in the state of Maryland. That's different up in New England. Look to New Hampshire, Peace Air Force Base. Testing for peace is one heck of an outfit. Google that one and see what Andrea Amico and her group are doing. They're a phenomenal group, and they're way ahead of the. I mean, we've traced 70 people who have died of cancer, different organ cancers in the last year, attributed to PFAS. They all served at Peace Air Force Base, so they're at that level. I mean, here Maryland hasn't even tested the water. So, but I mean, when I want to point my finger, it's Annapolis. Annapolis had drinking water with 70,000 parts per trillion, one of its wells up till 2 years ago. The Arundel Patriot. Have you all heard of the Arundel Patriot?
I have heard of.
Yeah, Google that. Google Arundel Patriot PFAS, Annapolis. Really, Annapolis had the most contaminated water of any city in the United States. 70,000 parts per trillion. And when the guy in charge of the water system in Annapolis was called on it, he said he didn't know what it was. Didn't know what. This was a year and a half ago. That's where we are. And working with the Maryland General Assembly last year, I became rather frustrated. And I've been around the block working with the General Assembly, so they're not interested.
One would think if they were to drink water in Annapolis, they may become suddenly more interested, but I suppose that's an education campaign. So
they are drinking.
Jason, you got it, man. It's education.
But 70,000 times the actual safe level of PFAS in drinking water ought to harden the insides, no pun intended, of even the most jaded Annapolitan.
Well, I'm sure now they've set up their granulated activated carbon systems, and I'm sure they've got it somewhat under control. We've made that much of a fuss.
Well, I'm sure I would have faith in Mayor Buckley and the administration in Annapolis and the city of Annapolis, but you highlight many shortcomings on our state level, and having having a fairly activist, progressive legislative delegation in Central Maryland. Hopefully one or more of those folks who like to take in this show will pay attention and take heed.
Well, I appreciate that.
Pat,
I hope so.
Pat, anything you want to say in closing?
Just Google PFAS health. When people listen to me, I've been told, they think I am exaggerating. It's just too much to get your head around in a half an hour or an hour. And so just Google it. You'll see that this is an existential threat. When Rachel Carson wrote of chemicals being an existential threat to humanity, she didn't know these things existed. But these are PCBs and asbestos and Agent Orange wrapped up in one, man. Bad stuff.
It is. I myself Googled PFAS health risks earlier today, and it is truly frightening and sobering. So I appreciate that suggestion, Pat. And thank you for being on the show, and certainly you would be welcome to come back anytime. We'd love to have you.
Cool. Well, let's see if we get any feedback from it. Thank you guys.
I hope so. So again, I would also urge the website www.militarypoisons.org. which features a lot of Pat's work on PFAS, and also contains the petition I mentioned, and also contains interesting articles about PFAS around the country and around the world. Jason, do you have anything in closing?
No concluding thoughts other than going to enjoy watching the Biden speech tonight.
Yeah, me too.
That would be,
I mean, I am such a schizophrenic, right? I'm a Bernie guy, you know, and I guess we're kind of, well, that's right. This thing's going to be edited anyway, right? So I don't know where you guys are, but it's fried beans, man.
We don't edit this once we start recording. I mean, that shows. I mean, and I'm outnumbered.
Hey.
I was originally Klobuchar, and you two are Bernie dudes.
Are you a Bernie dude there, Jason?
I am indeed.
Yeah, I love the guy. I don't know. Go AOC.
Exactly. There's the future of the movement.
Oh my goodness, we have bonding right here. I love it.
Doesn't take much. All right, man. Well, thanks.
Well, Pat Elder, thank you again for being a great guest. Jason, as always, thank you for being a terrific, stupendous, splendiferous co-host. I got that one out.
Yeah, you did. What was the other word you tried to use?
I can't say it.
What was it?
I suck. I can't say it.
Now I'm
indefatigable.
Indefatigable. I don't know. It's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Oh, well, you can say that.
That's right. So for Jason Booms, my name is Bill Woodcock. Join us on Sunday as we break down the DNC and tear down next week's RNC before it even begins. You have been watching or listening to another edition of Forward Maryland. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. All right. We are.
Looks like we're still.
Yes, we
recording.
Need to stop recording. How do we stop recording? Dude, are we done recording? I think we're done recording.
You have to do a hard.
This is funny. Stop.